Hi, I'm happy you found your way to my channel. I wanted to take the time to talk about how I feel towards Season of the Haunted. With a new season about to release, I thought there was no better time to do a review, so let's jump right in. I do want to put a quick disclaimer here at the start though. This video is about how I feel about the season and the changes that came to Destiny. My goal is to share my thoughts and opinions, and if you disagree with anything I have said, that's fine. Let's have a healthy discussion about it. But with that out of the way, let's get started. I wanted to start with what was probably the most impactful part of the season, Solar 3.0. Solar was brought forward to work under the same system as Stasis and Void. It also came with its own buffs, debuffs, these being Cure, Restoration, Radiant, Scorch, and Ignition. Every class has access to all of these terms, but each class focuses on being able to perform one a bit better than the others. Hunters are supposed to be the best at making themselves and allies radiant, Warlocks are supposed to be the best healers, and Titans are supposed to have the best Scorch to Ignition loop. However, in the live game, I feel that this doesn't really hold true. For example, Hunters with the new exotic Caliban's Hand can cause ignitions almost constantly, and Titans can have almost 100% uptime on Restoration with the exotic Lorelei. Now, I don't really see this as a bad thing, really. Build crafting has become one of the main topics that Bungie has really been pushing forward, and both of these things you have to build into. Well, maybe not with Lorelei, because that kind of does it all for you. Now, when Solar first came out, it seemed to be a little lacking, especially when coming off the high that was Void 3.0. It seemed like it took a little while for Solar to kind of find its footing and really show what it's capable of. Now that we're at the end of a season, some really interesting builds have come out that can really show off what Solar can do. If you have the Fusion Grenade spam of Starfire Warlocks, you've got Caliban Ignitions from Hunters, you have the Unkillable Lorelei Titan, or even the Bonk build. Solar feels pretty good, but similarly to what happened with Void, one class seemed to get the short end of the stick. Warlocks, who previously feasted very well with Stasis and Void 3.0, feel almost starved with Solar 3.0. The healer fantasy no longer feels very strong, and the 2.0 bottom tree playstyle was borderline removed. With 2 of the 3 aspects being focused on airborne gameplay, top tree seemed to become the primary focus for Warlocks in 3.0. Now in something like PvP, this is fine, but it was never very strong in PvE. Putting a build together on a Warlock that doesn't involve any kind of airborne gameplay is basically impossible to achieve now. Each class now has access to healing grenades, ways to buff their damage output, and in some cases, they can do it even better than Warlocks can. Now, I'm not saying it was better when healing was exclusive to Warlocks. I'm just having a hard time figuring out what makes Warlocks great in 3.0. Now, Hunters, on the other hand, were absolutely blessed with Solar 3.0 and have landed in a spot that have made them my personal favorite this go around. Blade Barrage has shot itself to become probably the best super in the game. Want boss damage? Blade Barrage. Have some troublesome ads? Blade Barrage. Want to shut down super? Blade Barrage. Want a super that can kill multiple players in different spots fairly easily? Crank up that sensitivity and Blade Barrage. Now, Blade Barrage wasn't great for a long time, and I'm happy that it feels usable again, but honestly, I think it is actually a little too strong. Not in terms of damage or kill potential. None of that. It still has a really low cooldown from it previously being bad. I could easily see Bungie just moving Blade Barrage into one of the longer cooldown tiers and it being fine there. Now, as mentioned earlier, Caliban's Hand, now that it's fixed, is extremely good. You can throw out ignitions left and right with ease, and it's extremely fun to do. Oh yeah, and don't forget about Young Amkar's Spine. Those trip mine grenades are kind of insane. Really, the only problems I'd say I have with Solar Hunters is that Gunslinger's Gamble only has 1 fragment slot available to it, and Golden Gun still doesn't feel very good to use in PvE. I'd really love to see a buff to Nighthawk so I can actually use it again and not feel outclassed by Blade Barrage. I'd say that Solar Hunters, though, are doing much better than their Void Hunter brethren. Now, Titans are also doing pretty well with Solar 3.0. The Bonk build is still extremely strong, and I think everyone knows at this point just how good Lorelei is. Seriously, like, if you don't want to die, just put on Lorelei. You cannot die with that thing on. I think most of the problems for Titans in Solar 3.0 is just how little their exotics actually interact with the subclass. Like Kepri's Horn doesn't work with anything. All three classes did walk away with some new tools to play with, and all feel generally pretty good to play. So I'd say overall, Solar 3.0 was pretty successful at what it was aiming to do. Alright, now that we have talked about Solar 3.0, let's talk about the story. As someone who found Nightmares and Shadowkeep to be the coolest part, just underutilized then, it's great to see them brought back and used again in such a cool way. It was cool to see how Crow interacted with his past self as Prince Uldren, finding out about Zavala's family and everything that he has gone through during his life, and the return of Gaul, who I didn't think I'd hear from again since Red War. The story team has really been firing off on all cylinders, and I've been loving every minute of it. There's some really cool lore entries too that have come out during the season, so I beg you, please go watch Bife or Mylan Games on any of it. You'll find it really fun. Honestly, I'm just really looking forward to what's going to happen next season and beyond, especially with what Lightfall has in store. But I think the only gripe that I'd say I have is one that others have expressed, which is that the weekly lockout kind of TV show style thing is starting to get a little repetitive in places and even predictable at other times. Also with this season, we got a new dungeon. Now dungeons and raids are my favorite part of the game, and I love learning the mechanics and mastering all the different roles that they come with. And I'd say that Duality is a pretty solid dungeon overall. The nightmare mechanic with the bells to go between them is pretty cool, and the story that's tied to the dungeon is actually very interesting once you get into it. Learning more about Calus's, Keitel, and Gaul's relationship was actually really great. It's making me like the characters that I initially felt to be kind of underwhelming to me at the start. I haven't soloed it yet. The bells decide to randomly kill you, making it pretty frustrating to do, and personally I just don't really like fighting Cabal because they fling you around all over the place like a ragdoll, but overall I think the dungeon's a pretty good one. So containment is an activity that exists in the game. Okay, yeah, it was pretty cool to begin with. Similar to Blind Well and Altar of Sorrows and stuff like that. You fight waves of enemies, kill a mini-boss, sometimes shoot a triangle in the sky, do that in 2 sections, and then you go fight a big boss with some kind of annoying mechanic that pops up once you hit a health cape. The activity is fine, it just gets boring. The only thing that changes is the boss you fight at the end, but that only changes on weekly reset and rotates through 3 different bosses. It's pretty great to run if you need like Ascendant Alloys or want to focus Umbral Engrams into good stat rolled armor, but I would just put on a podcast or something to do in the background because it's not really going to hold your attention for very long. Having the Leviathan come back as a patrol space was actually pretty cool to see too. Seeing it all infected with the Egregore, I think is what it's called. The stuff Calus was messing with during the mission we ran to get Deadman's Tail a few seasons ago. The constant flow of enemies while you explore the side areas is also really great. When you compare it to the desolate wasteland that is the Throne World, this place feels like a full party all the time. Now I will say that grinding out the title wasn't very fun. Having to wait around for potential hours just for one certain event to spawn was pretty frustrating, and at times made me question my sanity. I also thought we had moved away from non-match-made seasonal activities. Many times I would load into containment and just be by myself, even when I'd pick the option to put me into an activity that's already going with other players in it. Plus I can't even LFG for 5 other players because Leviathan is considered a patrol space, which is limited to a fire team of 3. So that's kind of frustrating. The seasonal activity is just what I've come to expect, something that isn't too demanding with a champion or 2 sprinkled in. Every season we get a kind of holiday event, Solstice being the one for Season of the Haunted. This is usually my least favorite of these holiday events, and sadly it still is my least favorite even after the changes it went through. I feel like these events just kind of highlight how stale the core playlist have become. The Gambit, Strikes, and Crucible just exist and don't really see much added or change to them. Crucible is finally starting to receive some attention, but Gambit and Strike still feel neglected, and nothing highlights that more than events like Solstice. There is one good thing that came from Solstice though, and that was its ability to really focus in on stats for armor. Sure, it was incredibly annoying to get a character to the point where you could focus for armor in every slot, but at least once you did it once, you didn't have to do it again. There's also this premium card battle pass thing you could buy, and it was the same price as a full season, and it just didn't seem worth it at all. I dread what this looks like for all future holiday events. I guess I'd rather that these events don't come with their own separate activity. I'd rather them just change how the core playlists work to spice things up a bit. Solstice used to come with modifiers that were themed around the subclasses, and these would give you buffs during an activity, but unfortunately this year they did not bring it back. I mean, I think that changing up the core playlist would be more fun and interesting for a holiday, but I can see where that can become frustrating for activities like Crucible and Gambit. So maybe they could just have its own modified playlist, kind of like how Guardian Games did with its own Strike playlist during the event. Alright, well I think that's pretty much covered everything I want to talk about in relation to the season. So if you made it this far, thank you. It's my first time making something like this, but everyone has to start somewhere, right? Well, I hope to see you again. Until next time, have a good one.
We're killers.